Another visit today, and we're in the home of Mrs. Flora Culp Davis. And this is on, I guess, what the telephone directory call it. I always called it the bottom road. And it says something about the,
Scale Road.
yeah, the Scale Road. Oh, that's a good name. Scale was once quite a center. I remember when I first started coming down in this area that there was a gasoline pump and a store there. And thank you for letting me come and visit you today, Miss Davis. We'll start off and ask you about your age.
Well, I'm 84 years old.
84.
I was 84 the 4th day of October.
And you're looking real good. You've got a fine cat here and a nice
The 7th day of October, I mean.
Yeah, well, that's fine. And your father was
Amos Culp.
Amos Culp, and your mother?
She was Blanche Walton Culp, of course. Then she
Walton.
married John McWaters.
Uh-huh.
After she was a widow, 8 years.
You ever see the Waltons on television? That's a program
Oh,
that used
yes,
to be on.
yes,
So
yes, I
that made
used to
me
see
think
them on television.
And she married a McWaters.
Mr. John McWaters.
Now, that was a brother to the husband of Miss Nina, was it?
His father.
Oh, his father.
Bob's
Mm-hmm.
Bob's father.
Well, she was always an active young lady. She always seemed young to me, though she lived to be in her 90s, because she kept coming to the big singing.
Nina did, yes, and my mother did too, as long as she was able to go.
Now, your mother became rather famous in, I think it might have been about 49, when there was a Louisville Courier-Journal Sunday magazine came out, and it had a picture of your mother at big singing, and she had her songbook open and was wearing a new Easter hat. And,
Oh, yes, they wore hats at that time.
uh-huh.
And she was sharing her book with Aunt Fanny White, Nina's mother.
Uh-huh.
She was sharing her book with her.
Now, did you ever engage in big singing yourself?
No, sir, I never did. I don't know one note from another.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about any of your grandparents?
Oh, sure, yes.
Well,
And my grandfather, he was shot. He was killed by an accident, a young boy playing with a gun.
mm-hmm.
And I remember my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother Walton, and I remember my great-grandfather White.
So you were kin to the Wyatt family also?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My grandmother, Culp, was White.
Uh-huh. Well, that gives you a lot of connections into some of the famous old names in
That's
Marshall
right.
County. Where did you go to school? Did you go to a one-room school?
Oh, sure. White Oak.
White Oak.
White Oak.
Now,
School.
about where was that located?
Well, if there was a school there now, it would be on Moore's Camp Road, out there about where the Tygoheen and along in there, just before you get to Tygoheen's, along in there.
Well, that places it real well. And would you happen to remember any of the teachers that you had?
Oh,
Maybe
sure,
one
I
or
had
two of them?
George Smith and George Slaughter and Brent Haston. And
Now, there's one that I remember.
Oh,
I remember Mr. Hastings when my father was in the nursing home. They shared a room
he
together.
was a good teacher. He was a good, clean teacher. He kept the schoolhouse nice and clean, and he was a good teacher. And then,
You know, I've read that one of the duties of teachers then was to clean up and to build the fires.
it's probably his duty, but sometimes the teachers thought that older girls should keep the floors clean.
Oh, they tried to make you work it out. I see.
And then Frank Beasley was one of our teachers one time, and he resigned and joined the Army. That was during World War
One, I suppose.
One. That's
Uh-huh.
right.
Well, you've remembered all of them, it seems.
I
That's
remember
great.
a lot of them because I
Uh-huh.
went on out there. There wasn't any way of me going to high school.
Mm-hmm.
Just went on and on. You just go on and on year after year.
Oh yes, I remember that in my own career, and I went to Blakely over in just the edge of Callaway County, near Wadesboro, and the first year I went, Miss Carrie Redden was the teacher, and there were about I guess 10 students that some of them were 20 years old. And they asked the teacher if she cared for them coming, and she said, no, if you'll behave, and why, you're welcome to come. And there was no high school nearby, as you say, so they came, and in our group picture, you can see 20, 21-year-old students attending the school.
After my mother and Mr. McWaters married, I went to Benton a few weeks of some kind of training, you'd call it, under Mr. Coy Reeder.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took the teacher's examination, they called it at that time,
Oh,
teacher's test, and
you
got a certificate to teach.
Uh-huh.
And I taught 2 schools with the teacher's certificate, and then the love bug bit me, and I got married.
Well, before we talk about the love bug, did you go back to White Oak to teach, or did you?
Oh, no, I taught at Pew
Pew, all right.
and Scale.
2 different schools, Pew
That's
and
right.
Scale. Now, I can imagine about where Scale was because, as Shelby
right
McCallum
over
used
here.
to say, where those roads cross is kind of the heart of downtown Scale.
That's right.
But now, where was Pew?
Well, you know where Lakeview Church is now? It's
Yes, ma'am.
down in that community,
Mhm.
around Lakeview Church, somewhere down in there.
Yes, ma'am. Well,
There's
good.
no school there now, it's either. It
Yeah.
was consolidated in with the North Marshall.
Mm-hmm. All right, now,
Calvert City one, I don't know which.
back to the love bug again. Where did this gentleman come from? Was he from Marshall County also?
Oh, yes, he lived over here, not too far from where we lived.
Mm-hmm. How did you meet him?
Oh, at some of the neighbor's house, I guess, at a party.
Uh-huh. Now, that is one of the things you did for amusement then. You
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
have radio, television, movies around, so you went to one another's houses and,
Made candy,
uh-huh. That sounds like a fine occupation to me.
made candy and played cards and things.
Uh-huh. Nearly every home used to have some kind of a board that they'd thump little wood circular things into pockets on.
I've heard of that, but I never did never did.
One of them I know they called owl.
Yes, owl board. We had some friends that had the owl board after Elmer and I married. We had some friends that had an owl board, and we played owl with them.
Mm-hmm. It was quite a bit of fun, especially if you had a sweetheart around with you.
Well, that was after we'd raised our family, though.
Yeah, okay.
They had all got married and away from home.
All right, and your husband, what did you do? Did you begin farming, say, when you first married, or?
Oh, yes, we farmed, raised tobacco and corn.
Nearly all of our older people know something about tobacco. I suppose you've wormed it.
Oh, yes, worm tobacco and sucker tobacco. Get up and do that before I went to run out and do that before I had my breakfast of the morning and come in and have breakfast and clean myself up and go to school.
Oh, you were energetic.
Well, we had to. We were raised in orphans. My father passed away before I was 10 years old, and we were raised orphans
I see.
until my mother married. When
Makes a lot of difference not to have a mother and mother
not
and
have
dad,
a father. Yes,
father.
that's right.
Either one or both sometimes.
Of
Yeah,
course, my
that-
mother there's 5 of us children, and she kept us all together, and
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have Social Security then, or welfare, or anything to take care of us.
The only thing to do is just work hard.
And had one dress to wear for Sunday, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. When we talked about Sunday clothes, we really meant it, didn't we?
We really meant it.
Yeah.
We sure did. One dress.
Okay. So you married and you farmed and you taught those 2 years. Did
That
you?
was before I married that I taught the school.
Yeah. Did you ever leave Marshall County and go to Detroit?
Oh,
or-
yes, we lived in Detroit 4 years.
Mhm.
And he worked at the rubber plant
Mhm.
in Detroit.
So many of them worked in some phase of the automobile industry,
That's right.
and so I guess he made tires or something.
He didn't like public work, so we came back and he farmed. And in their later years, when he got a tractor, he got a hay baler and he baled hay. And I hated that hay baler, though. Seemed like he'd go out one day and have a good day. The next day, he'd break everything and take all of it he made the day before to.
Buy the parts to fix it up again.
That's
Oh.
right.
Oh.
But we managed. We raised 7 children,
Life has its ups and downs.
and they're all living but one. I lost one daughter.
Do any
But
of them
looking-
live nearby?
Oh, they all, well, one girl lives in Gallatin, Tennessee, and one son lives in Cincinnati, and the rest of them lives near,
And those are not terribly far away.
except the daughter that passed away.
Uh-huh.
No,
And
son
then-
lives up here close to Bryansburg, and then Ray lives out close to Bethel Church, and Charles lives out close to South Marshall.
Have they given you any grandchildren to entertain you in
Oh,
your?
yes, I have 15 grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I believe it's 7 or 8 great-grandchildren.
Great grandchildren.
That's right.
Oh, that's a pride to a grandmother, I'm sure.
That's right. They're awful sweet.
There's something about it that they seem to be better than your own children were at the time, don't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
They've got.
Well, do you remember any amusing incidents about you? You were working hard, I know, you and your husband, but can you think of any sort of funny things that might have happened along in those days? Did company come and you kicked over the milk bucket or something?
No, I really can't. I really can't think of anything really funny that happened. I've had a lot of surprising company that would come in here, and I'd have dinner on the table. Of course, now you don't invite people to eat with you. Back then, why, you'd say, well, come in and eat dinner with us. And they would. They'd come in, sit down at my table, and eat dinner. And I'd have a big bowl of green beans and big bowl of potatoes and big pan of cornbread, and maybe a cobbler pie. That was our.
Most of our food was grown right there on the home place, wasn't
Oh, yes.
it? Had a big garden and as my dad used to say, a truck patch.
Oh, yes. Lots of corn and beans.
Do you still try to make a garden?
No. Last year I had some tomatoes and some peas and lima beans, but I don't. If I continue feeling like I do right now, I won't have anything this
No.
year.
Yeah.
But I'll try to stick out some tomatoes somewhere. I like to see a few tomatoes grow, and I don't know if I'm going to be able or not.
You said your husband didn't like public work. He enjoyed farming more. My father was the same way. How did you like living in
Oh, I
Detroit?
liked it because I liked the salary he made.
Mhm.
That's all I liked about it. I liked it because he made pretty good money at the rubber plant.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was good. I didn't care so much about living in town, but I liked the salary he made in the rubber plant.
What could you tell us about Scale? Now, you've been fairly close to Scale. Was it ever a much bigger town than it is now?
Well, at one time it had a mill there where they ground meal,
Mm-hmm.
and a little grocery store. Mr. McDaniel had a little grocery store there, and then they had a mill, a ground meal there one time, but I don't remember if he had the mill or who it was had the mill.
Well, that made it sort of a little gathering place.
Right there on the corner where
And that was the main road from Paducah to Benton then.
that's right.
That is.
Well, it was one of the main roads. We thought the main road was coming through Bryansburg.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, through Bryansburg and out.
But now, the old covered bridge, wasn't it on this road that came
That's
through
right,
Scale?
come through Scale. Well, it branched and come through Scale, and then it branched down here in what we call Holler.
Mm-hmm.
Down here in the Holler.
Yes, sir.
It branched there, and one come toward Bryansburg, and the other come toward Scale.
Yeah.
And one come up toward Bryansburg and through that settlement, and the other then come toward Scale and went on toward Paducah that way.
Well, what do you remember about the trip to Detroit? How, did you ride a train or
No,
drive a car?
I rode a homemade bus that Mr. Vic Mobley made and carried people to. That's the way me and my 3 children went up there.
Uh-huh.
My husband had been up there and worked about a month before we went.
In other words, there were so many people going that Mr. Mobley
Carried
made a.
made a van or a bus or
And
whatever you mind to call it.
So he went up back and forth on a regular
That's
basis.
right. Once a week, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, I guess some of the bus lines got started that way. I read an item in the Murray paper not too long ago about a fellow named C. Ray who did exactly that same thing and later turned out to build a rather large bus station.
I thought we'd never get there. We started early one morning, and he had to stop in Paducah and get his bus worked on, and then we went on, and he got stopped for speeding, and we had to stop and pay a fine or do something. I don't know whether he had to pay a fine or not, but he had to go to the judge's office.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would delayed us a few hours, and then but he kept driving all the way till he got there. He didn't stop overnight anywhere. But we drove all day and all night and all day the next day and didn't get there until about 5 o'clock the next day.
Oh,
Where I was going, I was give out with those 3 children.
I know you were. Well, I was going to say it must have been after midnight when you got there, but you went the second day.
The second day until about 5 o'clock before we got to where I was going.
Mm-hmm. That was a terribly long
Oh,
trip.
I was give out.
How old were the children then?
The youngest one was 2 years old.
Oh, must have cried a lot.
No, he was a good baby.
Yeah.
They were good children. They didn't know how to be mean then, like they are now. Now children will cry for everything.
Yeah. Well, tell us about some of the things that you did together with the neighbors. Did you, hog killing, for example?
Well, we just did mostly with family,
Mm-hmm.
killed hogs and with.
Now, that was really a big day, wasn't it?
Oh my! I never did get through.
No, you went.
Awfulest greasiest mess ever was.
The doorknobs and everything else turned.
Everything was greasy everywhere.
And then way into the night, you'd be grinding sausage.
Grinding and sacking sausage.
Yeah. When you cooked out the lard, I guess you saved the cracklings.
Oh yes, saved cracklings and made crackling bread. Then what we didn't use for that, we made soap.
Mm-hmm.
Made soap with
Yeah.
cracklings and other waste.
How did you make the soap?
Well, you'd buy the Merwar lye, and you had a recipe you went by.
Mm-hmm.
And
And you
cooked
boiled
it,
that
boiled
in a
it
big
in your
cast.
big black iron pot out in the yard.
Uh-huh. Had to stir
And
it a
then
lot.
Had to stir it a lot, and then you'd leave it and let it get cold and cut it out in cakes.
And when you got tobacco gum on your arms, which you did if you suckered,
That soap would take it off.
it would take it off.
That's right.
You didn't have to buy lava then, did you?
No, you didn't.
All right. Do you remember any of the doctors that might have been in the area? Did you ever have to call a doctor back in those days?
Oh, yes.
Well, of course, you had a lot of home
Dr.
remedies.
Washburn,
Uh-huh.
and Dr. Henson,
Dr. Washburn and Henson.
and
Well, it's springtime
I
now.
believe Dr. Caulfield was our doctor with our little boy that had asthma so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And he would come and sit here and stay and give him medicine and stay and sit till he would get easy. He was a good doctor.
Yes, I like Dr. Caulfield. In fact, he delivered me.
Oh,
My mother and father called him.
yes.
Actually, my mother was a distant cousin of Dr. Hughes at Hardin, and they had arranged for him to be the physician, but he was in a car wreck and couldn't come, so Dr. Caulfield came.
Yeah. I believe it was Dr. Caulfield.
Yeah, well, he left Hardin and moved to Benton and some time along in there.
He was a good doctor.
Did you ever try to cut down on doctor bills by making things like sassafras tea and drinking it?
Oh, we drank sassafras tea, but we didn't do it most for the health. We drank it because we liked it.
Mm-hmm.
We liked sassafras tea. I did. Now my children wouldn't drink it. They didn't like it, and my husband didn't care too much for it. But my mother liked it, and she always made it. And that taught me, I guess, to like it. And my oldest boy would dig it and cut it up in pieces and carried it to the grocery stores in Benton and sell it to them over there.
Sure. Well, make a little extra money.
That made him a little extra money. He was a great hand in trying to do little things like that, make money.
Well, that's good. He showed some enterprise about himself.
That's right.
I can recall one time picking up hickory nuts and breaking them and taking them and selling them in town.
Yeah.
We had
My children would pick blackberries, and I'd can them, and they'd sell the blackberries.
You know, it's pretty hard to beat a blackberry cobbler, isn't it?
It sure is. I made one last Saturday. My daughter and her husband were here from Tennessee, and I made a blackberry cobbler then, and it was really good.
Well, that's worth a drive from Gallatin anytime.
But you can't find blackberries, wild blackberries much now. You've got to get tame blackberries.
Well, that's true. They've
I don't know what it is.
Cleaned up so many of the fence rows and cut down so many of the.
I don't know what it is. Where there is, our briars, there's no berries on them. I don't know what it is that's caused them to not have berries.
Well, I still have a lot of berries every year around my old farm, but what keeps me out of them is the chiggers.
Oh, well, chiggers used to bother me when I was a girl and picking berries, but they don't bother me anymore. I guess my old fat's not so good anymore.
Well, I don't know what it is. Some people don't seem to be bothered, and others
You
are.
rub some onion around the bottom of your pants and around your sleeves,
I
and
never,
around.
never tried
Cut an
that.
onion open and rub it around on your clothes.
Well, thanks for the tip. When do you remember when you got your first radio? That must have been a lot of company to you.
Oh, it's been so long I don't remember it. Yes,
I noticed you were listening to the radio when I came in.
yes. On Saturdays I put the radio in good use because I don't care too much for the television then. If it hadn't been Saturday, I'd probably had the television going.
Uh-huh.
I use television a lot through the week.
What's
Yes,
your,
our minister will come on at 11. Our preacher comes on at 11.
yeah, well, who is
Brother
that?
Brasher.
Brother Brazier. And, of course, you like to listen to him.
I like to listen to him. He's a fine preacher.
Has going to church changed much over the years, or is it about the same as it's always been?
It's changed a lot because you got better ways of getting there.
Yeah, you don't have to drive an old road wagon.
Don't have to walk and don't have
Walk.
to go in a wagon, or you have cars. And now I have the van. The van picks me up
Uh-huh.
now.
Well, that's one big change, isn't it? The
It
churches
certainly
have
is.
become,
Churches are having vans now. Take people
I'd
that
say
don't-
probably they're more able now than they were then. They didn't have the money in the early days.
And we're getting in Briceburg Baptist Church is on Acts now. Do you know what that means on television?
Oh, yes, the American
you said-
Christian Television Service
That's
of the
right.
Southern Baptist Convention.
That's right.
I'm well aware of it, yes.
They're on Acts now.
And I
Channel
believe that
7, I believe, Channel 4.
the county cable system is carrying that, aren't they?
I wish it would come down through here because I see now I'm getting to where I'm not going to be able to go to church on Sundays.
Mm-hmm. And that'd be a great comfort to
It'd
you.
be, I'm going to try to start working to get them to run that cable down here. They say this Purchase Parkway is the hindrance, I think, to getting that
Uh-huh.
cable down through here.
Well, Miss Davis, you know that 30 minutes is just nearly gone. Do you think of anything that you'd like to say before we sign off? Maybe you've got a little anecdote you'd like to tell, or?
I don't know of anything.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I was so out of breath when you got here after going up there and emptying that garbage.
Well, I told you it'd go by so fast you'd hardly know we'd been on. But
Well.
thanks a million anyway for letting me come, and we appreciate your cooperation. We've been visiting with our oral history microphone in the home of Mrs. Flora Culp Davis on the Bottom Road, near Scale. This is Ray Mofield. We return you now to our studios.